How frustrating is it to get all geared up, pick a spot, start fishing, and spend hours not catching anything? I mean, trout have a brain the size of a strawberry. Why are they so flippin' hard to catch? When the fishing gets tough, a lot of us default to changing our flies, maybe wading up to that lucky fishing hole, or just throwing in the towel altogether and vowing to come back another day and get our revenge. Most often, though, there's a really simple explanation for why trout won't eat your flies. They just don't look real. So today on Untangled, we're taking a deep dive into how to put your flies in front of fish and make them look like the real thing. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. Happy to be here in the beause studio at a VFC Worldwide HQ this week. If you're watching the video podcast, I'm here in the fancy studio down here because I'm hanging with the guys this week. So it's always fun to record a show or two while I'm down here. And today we're talking about a topic that, as you can tell if you're watching the video podcast, I take extremely seriously, and that's presentation. Because, my shirt's all wrinkly and probably needs to be ironed and whatnot. So obviously I take this seriously. Little question about that for a minute. Does anyone still iron anymore? Definitely drop a comment and let me know if you do, because I don't iron anything because I don't really care. I might get in trouble for saying this, but my wife, I think she's ironed 2 shirts in our whole marriage. I still love you. I'm not upset about it. Neither of us iron is the point that I'm trying to make there. And, my mother-in-law, I'll show up with a wrinkly shirt at my mother-in-law's house, and she'll just look at me. She's giving me that look of disappointment, right? And just, Spencer, you got to iron your shirts. You look rumply. You just don't look professional. You've got to put your best foot forward. Well, this is my best foot, Laura. All right, I'm a rough around the edges, smelly old fisherman. I'm sorry. This is what you got for a son-in-law. No, I hope I'm not the smelly old fisherman part of it. I'm definitely the old fisherman, but I don't know about the smelly. At least today. I put deodorant on today. And that was probably too much information, but you know what? That's what you come here for. You come to Untangled and VFC because, dadgummit, we give you everything and more than you ever wanted to know. So anyways, we're going to talk about how important presentation is today. It's just the value of making sure that your flies look as real as possible. And to start us off, I've got a little story I want to share. I'm fortunate to live by this little creek, and I was out fishing it just last summer with my neighbor across the street. And the creek's not too big, but it's wide enough in a couple of spots where I can fish all the right bank and he can fish all the left bank, and then all the really fast water in the middle where the fish don't hang out anyways, is fine. So we were just working our way up, fishing that. And it's late summer. We're both wet wading, and my neighbor Calvin, he's hooking up pretty consistently, out catching me like 5-1. And I'm really having a hard time even finding any fish on my side of the river. So I kind of go upstream a little bit around the corner away from him so I can see if I can find any more fish. And I come up to this one hole. There's this nice deep pool, and it shallows up really quick at the end, and then the water dumps out of the end of that pool in this little mini waterfall, maybe 2-3 feet. And at the bottom of this pool, I can see this big old rainbow trout. He's just parked right at that transition where it goes from deep to shallow, and he's just moving side to side, opening his mouth, eating nymphs, just chowing down like a chubby kid at a buffet, like me at a buffet, right? So he's stoked. He is ready to eat. And I'm getting excited because I've got a chubby Chernobyl on with Pat's rubber legs underneath it. And that on this stream, that time of year, that is a deadly combination. There's always a lot of stonefly nymphs around, and the chubby Chernobyl represents that grasshopper. Late summer, we're starting to see those poking out into the water. So I felt really confident in my rig. Now, the only real problem is there was an entire cottonwood tree leaning over the hole at like a 45-degree angle, and then there were a whole bunch of willows directly behind me. And the only place I could stand where I had any sort of casting window was on this slippery log that kept shifting underneath me. So I'm trying to not die while I'm throwing this cast. I was just like, if I fall, I fall. It's not that deep. And it was warm enough if I got wet. That'll feel good, right? So I fling this cast into this pool, I work it around that tree, and the rainbow, as soon as my rig hits the pool, lifts his head to look, and that Pat's rubber leg shoots over its head by a good 6-7 inches. And the rainbow looked at it, give him credit. He took a gander, but he didn't move for it. So I made another cast, and another cast, and another cast, and it was just the same thing. He'd look at it, but he wasn't going to move. He'd look at it, and then he'd just eat the stuff that was right in front of his face, which I don't blame him. That's an effective way to do your food if you're a fish. And I respect how effective fish are at eating. It's pretty stinking impressive, right? So what I decided to do this time is I pulled my rig in, and I realized that Pat's just wasn't getting deep enough. So I tied another foot of tippet onto the end of my dry dropper rig. So I just lengthened that dropper by another foot. And then I sat there, I kind of did the calculus and figured out how far upstream can I throw this rig so that by the time it gets to where that rainbow's eating, that nymph's had time to drop. And I got really lucky. This usually does not happen, but I got lucky and I made the cast on the first go. I got it up as far into the top of this pool as I could. It drifted down. The whole time I'm still keeping my balance on this log. And as soon as that Pat got right in front of the fish, I just saw him move. I saw him move over to the Pats, and then I saw him move back. My dry fly never moved, but I saw the fish move a bunch. So I just went ahead, excuse me, a little stuffed up this morning. But I just went ahead. As soon as the fish moved and then moved back to his original feeding lane, boom, I set the hook. Now, it got western after that because he shot downstream through that little waterfall. And then that log I was standing on, he tangled himself up underneath it. So we had ourselves a little rodeo for a minute while I got him untangled miraculously. I have no idea how he stayed on. And it was like a 15, 16-inch rainbow. So nothing to write home about, nothing to sneeze at. That's still a wonderful, beautiful fish. And it was the biggest fish I caught all day. It was a lot of fun, but just tons of fun to troubleshoot that and really work my way through the problem of that fish obviously being interested in my fly, but not eating it. And the most important thing to remember here is I didn't just immediately change my fly. I didn't spend 10 minutes digging around in my fly box hoping for inspiration because, he's interested, but he's not interested enough. No, I didn't try to make that fish move out of his lane to eat my fly. What I did was I changed how I presented that fly, the one that I already had tied on, and as soon as I changed the presentation of it, I changed the depth. That is when everything connected. Trout rodeo ensued. I did fall in the water netting that fish, by the way. I got done and I was sopping wet head to foot. So this story really does serve, though, as I think one of the best answers, all lightheartedness aside. I think this is one of the best answers we get to the question, which, probably top 5 most common questions we get here at VFC, which is, what fly should I use? And my response to that, dead serious, not trying to be sarcastic or anything, is a good drift. Honestly, that's what fly you should use. It doesn't matter all that much. The fly pattern that you've got on, it matters if you're making that look real and putting it in front of fish, right? That's our presentation mantra. That is your job as an angler. Put flies in front of fish and make them look real. This goes for trout. This goes for carp, panfish, bass, whatever. It is way more important to just get your flies to look real and to get them into a presentation where it doesn't spook the fish than it is to worry about whether your fly is an exact, perfect, like the absolute best match for whatever is on or in or around the water. And just to drive that point home, I did a little bit of carp fishing a while ago. I haven't done a lot of it since just because there's not a ton of carp fishing up by where I live now. But when I lived in Utah, there were a bunch of little ponds in this business park that were full of carp. So middle of the day, I'd show up to fish, and you'd see all the businessmen sitting there in their shirts and ties at their computers and their windows looking out at me while I'm fishing for carp. the middle of their workday. I'm still surprised I never got asked to leave. But anyways, I would just use whatever random streamer I had in my truck, and I would just throw it out there. And I had one friend who got real scientific about the carp fishing, and he tied up these very specific carp flies and just little, almost crab-like looking things that would fall right to the bottom, and then you could just inch them along in the mud right in front of the fish. So the carp, when you're fishing them like this, you want to be able to watch them suck your fly into their mouth, and because you've got to see it, because you won't feel it, because they'll suck it in and spit it out as soon as it doesn't feel real. So you've got to be able to see them, and you've got to be really quick on the draw. And I wasn't. I was kind of middling success with the carp, but my buddy that would fish with me sometimes he'd have all these carp flies, specialty patterns that he'd tied up, that he'd bought, and they worked well for him. But I would just pick like this little bunny leech I had, or this micro leech that I had from lake fishing, or whatever it was. I'd toss it out there and, get it in front of that fish and just let it sit there so they could come along and suck it up off the bottom. And I did almost as good as he did. He was a much more experienced carp angler than I was, so he was better at those quick hook sets. He was better at spotting the fish than I was. But as far as getting chances for hookups, I feel like it was pretty neck and neck. So again, that's just another example of really doesn't matter. Okay, the fly pattern doesn't matter that much. Now, this is not to completely discount matching the hatch. Do not take it as me saying, hey, yeah, match the hatch, it doesn't matter. Because how often do you hear us talk about right fly formula here at VFC? How often do you hear us talk about this stuff? It is important, okay? You don't want to be throwing a chubby Chernobyl in February, because chubby Chernobyls represent your grasshoppers or the terrestrials, and February, that's not when they're active. That's not when those bugs are going to be out and about, okay? So you do still need to have a grasp of what flies are hatching and when they're hatching, and be able to match that as good as you can. What I'm telling you is, don't get all knotted up and worried about whether it's the exact perfect fly. Instead, make sure that, hey, I've matched the hatch. There's mayflies out on the water. I clearly see mayflies. I clearly see fish eating mayflies. They are definitely eating the adults. I've got a parachute Adams on in a size very similar to what I see. You do that, you're going to be fine in a lot of situations. Now you just got to work on getting that parachute Adams to look as real as possible, to drift as naturally as possible. Okay? So that's the best advice I can give you, is that presentation should be the number one focus while you're out on the water. Match the hatch, put that effort in, because you need to have a fly that's a reasonable imitation of food that they're currently eating. Otherwise, you will be in a world of hurt. But make sure that once you've picked that fly, fish it hard and fish it confidently. That's the other part. I do see some beginners, they'll get overwhelmed by all the fly choices that they've got. They'll be a little worried that, is this going to work? I don't know. I'm not sure. And they fish it kind of tentatively. They don't really fish it like they believe in it. And I think that leads to bad drifts and bad presentation. Instead, have confidence in the fact that you know how to pick a fly out of the box. You can follow the right fly formula. You can do it. Okay. And I know you guys can do it. Even if it's your first or second time out on the water, it is so simple. It is doable, and it works, right? We've talked about this a ton here on the show. It is a very effective way to match the hatch and figure out what's going on. So have confidence in your abilities to do that. Then fish that fly as best as you possibly can, right? Now, that was some of the abstract and some of the I'm going to pump you up and make you feel good stuff. And that's important. But I also do want to get into just a couple specifics of presentation that actually matter. Some concrete advice you can go out and use next time you're on the water. Okay. So a couple of other things that are going to help your presentation improve. Number one, make sure that you tie your flies with a good clean knot, that it's not a messy knot, it's not a poorly tied knot, and make sure you trim the tag ends of all your knots. Now, I know some folks are going to argue with me on this, I've actually got a guide friend. He and I have a long running debate about whether trimming the tags off of your knots on your flies matters. He doesn't think it matters. I think it does matter because I've had fish not eat it when the big tag's been hanging off of the fly. So dress those flies up as best you can. I made the joke about ironing at the beginning of the show, right? Iron your shirt. This is part of it. Put your best foot forward. Okay. You never get a second chance to make a first impression, is what an old college or a high school basketball coach I used to know would say all the time. You never get a second chance to make a first impression, Durant, so make it count. Okay, he's 100% right. Okay, make that fly look as good as you can on the end of your leader. Trim it up, make sure it's looking nice. Now, second part of this, a big part of presentation is putting your flies where they belong, putting them in front of fish. So fish aren't eating, they're not feeding in rapids, they're not hanging out in really fast water. So if you're spending time fishing rapids, you're wasting your time. Okay, learning to read the water, learning to identify where the fish are going to be holding, where you have the best chance of finding fish, that is a huge skill that is going to dramatically improve your abilities to utilize these presentation skills and actually catch some fish out of them. So if you don't know how to identify fishy water, like runs, riffles, pools, seams, if all that stuff is, you're still not feeling great about it, or that sounds like Greek, this is brand new, just a complete your first blush with it, that's fine. We've actually got a free ebook that goes over all of this stuff. It tells you where to look for fish, what type of water to look for them in, gives you lots of diagrams and examples. It's our Finding Fish ebook. Again, it's completely free. I'll throw a link to that down in the show notes, or there will be a QR code here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Go take a look at that because that will help your presentation skills a ton. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is drag. Okay? Because I think this is the number one killer of a lot of presentations out on the water. And drag is just simply your fly moving in a way that's not natural. Because real life aquatic insects, whether they're drifting in the water, right? They're nymphs, they're underwater and they're just moving down there. Or if they're on top of the water as an adult, they're moving with the water with very few exceptions. You might see they might kind of struggle against the water every now and then to get up off the water when they're trying to fly. But when they're just sitting on top of the water, they're just drifting with the current. Okay, they are not moving against it. So if you throw your flies out there and you're fishing a dry fly and you notice the dry fly's got a little wake behind it, like it's towing somebody to ride a jet ski behind it or something, that's a dead giveaway that you got drag, because that fly's moving in a way that's not natural with the current. You want the fly drifting with the current as much as possible. Same with your nymphs. You throw it out there. If your indicator is moving with that big wake behind it, your nymphs are dragging. They are not drifting naturally. So it comes down to being able to pay attention to your dry fly, your indicator, whatever you're fishing, and making sure that it is drifting along with the current, that it is not doing anything against that current, that it is just going with the flow. That's what you want your flies to do. Just go with the flow, bro. That probably needs to be on a shirt now and a hat. I'll get our design team right on it. But that's the big thing. Look out for drag. Pay attention to it. Try and mitigate it as best you can. I know it's not easy, okay? But if you can figure out where the fish are with that ebook and all the other resources we have on it, then you can minimize drag. And then I spent a good chunk of this time talking about how important it is to fish those flies confidently. Okay, when you've matched the hatch, when you've gone out there, you've looked at what's in, on, or around the water, and then you have matched that based on the size, the shape, and the color. When you followed the right fly formula, you're in business. It does not matter if it's the exact perfect fly, unless you're on some tailwater somewhere where the fish all have PhD, like triple PhDs, and honestly, they just laugh at you, really, instead of eat your flies. If you're at a place like that, yes, certain fly patterns really are going to make a difference over others. But a vast majority of the fishing that we do as anglers is not in places like that. Okay, so focusing on just doing your best, fishing it confidently, not worrying if that fly is exactly perfect, letting go of that, just fish it confidently. That is really going to make a difference for you in how these flies get presented and ultimately in how many fish you end up putting in the net. So I hope that helps. I hope you got something out of that. If there's any more questions about presentation, about worrying about that stuff, please let me know. Drop comments. Send us something via the Pony Express. They still know how to get to me, even though I'm on the road a lot lately. It will show up. All kidding aside, I'd love to, if you have any more questions about presentation, anything at all, let me know. And again, just remember, don't focus on changing your flies. Don't focus on that. Focus on getting your drift and your presentation perfect first. And then if that doesn't work out, that's when I move into changing my flies. But I focus on presentation way before I ever think about changing my fly, just like in that story I shared right at the beginning. Okay, I promise I'm done. We're going to wrap that up, and we're going to move on to the Q&A portion of this week's show. Every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, there's a link to send those into us down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Charlie from Texas has our first question, writes in and says, as a newbie, I've always been told match leaders and tippet size to the rod size, i.e. 5 weight to 5X. 7 years into fly fishing, I fish the southernmost trout fishery in the U.S., and it's pressured. I have now only used 3X leaders and tippet for the first fly and occasionally a 5X off the first fly to a smaller nymph. What are your thoughts? Charlie, it's a good question. Really dovetails nicely with what we're talking about today as well. I actually heard that too, that you're supposed to only use 5X leaders on 5-weight rods and 4X leaders on 4-weight rods. And I have no idea where that came from because it's absolutely not true. Tippet sizes, line weights have nothing to do with each other. 5-weight line is just line that's rated to cast a 5-weight rod. And 5-weight line is designed to handle a pretty wide variety of fly sizes. Your fly line tells you what size of fly you can throw with it. The lighter the fly line, the smaller the flies. The larger the fly line, the larger the flies you can throw with it. 5-weight's right smack in the middle of the road. It can handle nymphs, it can handle dries, it can handle some smaller streamers. It's just that all-purpose, do-it-all line weight that's really effective. So, again, there's no correlation between the fly line size and your tippet or leader size. I fish everything from like 6X all the way up to 12-pound fluorocarbon on my 5 weights, just depending on what I'm doing on a given day with it. So, yeah, that part doesn't matter at all. Generally speaking, though, I think as fly anglers, we fish with tackle that's too light far too often. I think fish, with the exception of those that are in very pressured rivers, I think trout are a lot less leader shy than we give them credit for. Now, some people are going to fight me on this and say, "Oh no, I only catch them if I go down to 6X," and that very well might be true. I'm not telling you that you're wrong, but I'm telling you from my experience of fishing Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, Oregon, Montana, Arizona, Nevada, Alaska, New York. Where else have a few other spots? It's not on one hand that I can count how many times downsizing a leader mattered, but it is the exception, not the rule. There are times when I do need to downsize leader to catch a fish. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but overall, I think we fish with tackle that's a little too light sometimes because we're worried about overlining them, or we're worried that they're tippet or leader shy, that the thicker leaders making enough noise, enough disturbance on the water when it lands, that the fish feel that and they scamper and they know it's not real. There is truth to that. When your line and your leader lands on the water, the fish's lateral line can sense that. So yeah, small dry flies, low, skinny water, really clear conditions, it definitely pays to go lighter in your tippet. But most of the time, I fish 4X. That's my go-to 90% of the time is 4X leader, 4X tippet for just about everything. I'll go down to 5 especially a lot right now with all the mayflies hatching and the smaller bugs coming off. I'll be down to 5, maybe even 6 if things get real Western. But I stick with 4 for the vast majority of what I'm doing. Okay. I'm also a big fan of getting fish in as quickly as possible and playing them as little as possible in the rod, because the longer you play a fish, the longer you fight it, the lower chances are for survival after you release it. And to where we care about catch and release, we want to take care of the fish that we're catching. We want to be able to catch them again, let them grow and get even bigger. That matters. That's also why I definitely recommend using barbless hooks. And if you don't buy flies that have barbless hooks, like none of ours have barbless hooks here at VFC, and that's actually for a reason, because when you're putting dry dropper rigs together, what you do is you take your flies and you crimp the barb in your hemostat, your pliers, whatever you got. You press that barb down, so it's going to go in and out of the fish essentially the same way as a barbless hook does, but it doesn't get rid of all the barb completely. There's still a little bump. Now, that barb does not get stuck in the fish, whatever's left when you crimp the barbs down. But that little bump is just enough when you're setting up dry dropper rigs and if you're tying nymph rigs off of each other in tandem. So you're tying one nymph off the bend of the hook of the other one. That little bump doesn't let your leader slide off the end of the hook. Now, I'm on record as saying that, that really hasn't happened to me. I'll tie a lot of barbless hooks, and I don't really run into the issue of my leader sliding off or my tippet sliding off of the barbless hooks completely. But I know that's an issue that a lot of folks run into. So leaving that barb on there, you just crimp it, still functions like a barbless hook, goes in and out with minimal pain, effort, damage to the fish. But that little bump that's left over stops your tippet from sliding off of it. So it's a really nice way to do it. Just crimp the barb down and you're good to go. But those barbless hooks, that's another reason we recommend using them, is because it is amazing to me how easily barbless hooks just pop right out of the fish. As soon as you let tension off of that fish, Alex and I, this happens to us all the time. We'll be out fishing and we crimp the barbs down. We were good to go. We hook into a fish. One of us nets it, and then the other guy, as soon as it's in the net, we let the tension go off of the rod and the line. And I'd say probably 80-90% of the time, that fly just pops right out of the fish's mouth. So we don't have to mess around in its mouth trying to pull the fly out. We don't have to handle the fish too much. It's just real quick. We just reach in, quick little lift out of the water if we're getting some video, and then it's on its way. It's not out of the water for too long. Just taking care of the fish as best we can. And part of that is, not playing them for too long on tippet that's crazy light. I went through a phase where I fished 7, 8, 9x tippet a lot. So I was playing fish for forever because I couldn't really use too much force on them or else I'd break them off. And I probably killed a lot of fish, unfortunately, doing that. I played them to the point of exhaustion. And I'm not super proud of that, to be completely honest. But, that's just one of those things. You learn and you grow in this sport. And I think definitely have some fun playing the fish. That's what we're there to do, right? It's fun to fight the fish. And I'm not telling you to just use rope, crank your drag down, and just haul them in as quick as you can. But using heavier line, using 4X, gives you the ability to really put some pressure on some fish and get them in relatively quickly. So that's really why I go down to 4X a lot of the times, what I use. So short of it, with your question, you asked me what I thought. You're catching fish, right? So it doesn't matter. Keep it up, man. As long as you're catching fish, just do what is going to work and is going to catch fish. Get them in as quick as you can. So appreciate it a bunch. Thanks for the question. Dylan from Wales has our next question, writes in and says, "Hi, Spencer. First of all, I just want to say I'm a huge fan of the show and have been listening since around episode 20 of Untangled. You and VFC are the main reason why I got into fly fishing as a sport. Also the fact that all the rivers around my local area are fly only. Anyway, on the show, you always talk about the main 3 types of fly fishing methods: dry, nymphing, and streamer. However, I think you're missing out on the most relaxing and effortless way to catch fish, or effortless way to fish for trout and salmon: wet flies. My question to you is, why don't you cover this method as much as the other 3? I think you've done 1 or 2 episodes in the past about wet flies, but not as many as the other 3. Is this because in America, wet flies aren't a massive thing, or do you just prefer other methods for fly fishing? If you are reading this, thanks for taking the time. Also, as a side note, Pepsi Max is better than Coke Zero. Not sure how you enjoy that stuff. Dylan, I almost just threw your question right in the trash with that Pepsi Max stuff. You better check yourself there, sir. No, I'm kidding. Appreciate you sending the question in, even if your judgment is a little suspect with that Pepsi Max love you got there. I don't think wet flies are as popular here in the western part of America because I know very few anglers out here in this neck of the woods personally. I'm not saying that very few anglers do it. I'm saying I personally know very few anglers out here in this neck of the woods who fish that way. I know more folks out on the East Coast who fish that way with wet flies, with soft tackles. But I've only fished out east once, so I can't speak to that at all. I do know a few guys over there who fish these flies and enjoy them. I just don't use them a ton. I honestly just don't find it to be a very engaging way to fish. You said that it was, where did it go? Relaxing and effortless. And if that's what you're looking for out on the water, you want some relaxing, effortless ways to catch fish. You just want to swing, step up. That's awesome. I am stoked that you've found a fishing method that you love and that you enjoy. I've done it a few times, and it just doesn't do it for me. It's like I tried Tenkara a while ago, and yeah, it was okay, but there wasn't anything about it that made me think, oh, I'm going to keep doing this. And that's not to dog on it. I don't hate Tenkara. I don't hate wet flies. It's just not the way that I really like to fish. I like my dry droppers. I like my streamers. Sometimes I tolerate nymphing. But that's the way that I really like to fish, is just picking the water apart with different rigs and really trying to dial in where the fish are at. For me, watching a fish to come up and eat a dry fly, that's my favorite thing. And if there's a chance I can catch fish on a dry fly, that's what I'm going to do that day. It's just a lot of fun for me. I love the visual aspect of it. And that's a little bit of why I don't like wet flies as much, because you don't really see your fly. You see where your fly's swinging. You can watch the swing, but you don't really see the fly. So there's less visualness to it. And then you're just letting them almost hook themselves in a lot of instances. And again, I'm not knocking on it. I'm not saying that it's less than or it's not a good tactic or a good way to fish. It's definitely, a lot of folks really enjoy it and love it. It's just not my personal cup of tea. So, that's really why we don't talk about it too much on the show. Is it's just not something that I don't do it enough to really talk about it either. I know it's simple, but it's also one of those things where I've done it probably. I've gone out and spent an entire dedicated day just swinging wet flies probably 7 or 8 times in my life. So I don't feel like that's enough time for me to come on the podcast and say, oh, well, when you're swinging flies, you want to do this and you need to do it this way. Like, yeah, I can go get some article from somebody who's done it and I can read it to you guys and that'll help. But that's not really actually going to be helpful, right? You want on the water experience from people who've done it. I just don't have a lot of that, unfortunately, with wet flies. And then we honestly don't get a lot of questions about wet flies either into the podcast. I read every question that gets sent in, and wet flies are very rarely asked about. So it's just one of those things that I think for whatever reason, over here in America, it's just not as commonly done. So again, not knocking on it at all. I know wet flies play a huge role in fly fishing history. Some of the prettiest flies ever designed were wet flies meant to be fished on the swing. And there's a lot of beautiful simplicity in fishing on the swing, of just casting, letting it swing, stepping up in the run, casting, letting it swing, stepping. Like, it's a beautiful, very relaxing, just like you said, very relaxing way to fish. And for the folks who enjoy it, I know it is all consuming in a lot of ways, especially if you start swinging for salmon or steelhead. It can be it can be crazy what it does to you. But again, it's just not my personal cup of tea, and something we don't get a ton of questions about. But I appreciate you sending that in. Thank you. Will from Rhode Island has our next question, writes in and says, there's a 25 to 30 inch golden rainbow in a pond in town that I've been itching to catch. I've matched the hatch, tried something different, and I've even stepped back to see what I could be doing wrong, but just can't seem to hook onto it. The fish almost mocks me about 6 feet away from the bank, so I'm hoping you might know something I don't. I love the podcast, and I listen to it every week at work and get revved up for the weekend so I can get a line in the water. Thank you, and always tight lines. Well, I think you might be the first question we've had from Rhode Island, so congrats on that. Never been to Rhode Island. I want to go because it's just like, I think Rhode Island's the size of the county that I live in Wyoming. So I want to go. I want to go see it. But anyways, I feel the pain with those big fish that you can see, even if it's fresh off the hatchery truck and you see it out there in the little community pond. It's still a big fish, and there's still something in us that says, I gotta go catch that because it's a big fish and I can do it because I know what I'm doing. Please don't come after me, Tim Allen, for stealing your home improvement grunt. With a fish like that, you talked about a pond in town, a fish like that being that big. 100%, that's a retired brood stock that just came out of the hatchery. What that means is it spent its entire life in the hatchery, where it was just laying eggs, or if it was a male, they were collecting its milt and mixing that to make as many trout as possible. And then, once they reach the end of their life, they're not reproductive anymore. So they'll take these big brood stock fish and they'll stick them in these town ponds, so people can have a chance to catch a really big trout. It's very common, happens a lot, even here out west. You'll see them dump the brood stock into some of these ponds. So a wild fish that's that big, a 25 to 30 inch trout that's that big, almost exclusively is going to be snacking on other fish, crawdad, leeches, some other aquatic critters. They've largely moved on from their diet of aquatic insects at that size. It's not to say they still won't eat them. I've caught some very large rainbow trout, especially. I caught a 25-inch rainbow trout on a size 18 zebra midge once. So they'll still eat those, but I think the chances of them eating those tiny, tiny aquatic insects is a lot smaller, just because they're at the point where they want a bigger meal. They want to move. It takes a lot more energy for them to move because they're so big, so they want to get as much meal for their movement as possible. Okay? So I would, even though this fish isn't wild, I would still consider throwing some streamers to try and trigger what predatory instincts might still be there. It might still have some, even though it's probably lived in a hatchery its whole life. You might still trigger something from it. So I would give a streamer a shot. If that doesn't work, honestly, try a pellet fly. Yeah, you heard that right, a pellet fly. They mimic the pellets of Purina trout chow that a lot of these fish get fed in the hatcheries. So it's basically just like a brown egg pattern, and they just float, so you can tie it out of a little bit of yarn or foam. Just chuck it out there right in front of it. Either let it float or put a tiny, tiny little split shot on it, let it drop in front of its mouth. And that might work too. I've seen a lot of big hatchery fish caught on like a waltz worm or a pheasant tail, something that's brown and small and dark and could maybe look like a pellet at that point. I'd give those things a try, see what happens. I'd throw a streamer, throw some pellet flies at it. The other thing to remember too is with fish, when they get that large, if they're eating other fish for food, so if this fish, if it's still wild enough, it's eating other fish for food, they might feed for a really short window every day because they're that big. They go move around. They catch a 14-inch fish. That's their meal for the day. That's what they're eating. They're done. They'll eat the whole thing and they'll just kind of hunker down, digest it, and then they'll go off and move again when they get hungry. So you might really need to spend a lot of time there to try and find a window when it's actually feeding as well. So that's another little wrinkle that's thrown into it. But hopefully that helps. Hopefully you catch it. If you do, definitely let us know. I'd love to see pictures of it if you do manage to get it in. But I appreciate you sending that question in, and that's going to wrap up the Q&A portion of the show this week, folks. And now it is time for the Live Real Life moment. Every week here at Untangled, we end the show by sharing a story, picture from folks out in the audience who are living real life. We love to see what y'all are up to, hear about the adventures you're going on, and share a little bit in the great fly fishing times that y'all are having. So if you've got a Live Real Life moment that you would like to send in to us, there's a link to do that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment is from Katie, who writes in and says, Spencer, thank you so much for all the work you put into the show. I've been hitting the usual spots pretty consistently, but needed something new, a new adventure. Your show inspired me to try something new. I've always dreamt of finding wild brook trout on a blue line stream. After countless hours of staring at maps, I set out on a Saturday morning, drove the truck in as far as I could, and hiked the rest of the way. When I finally got to the stream, I was over the moon to see some brookies holding behind a rock. At this point, it didn't matter if I caught any. I was just so excited to have found them. A few minutes later, I had my first ever brook trout in the net. I was absolutely honored to see such a beautiful fish. I ended up having a banner day and caught so many brookies, I lost count. The story could stop here and it would still be amazing, but the next day I couldn't help myself. I went back. My second fish of the day was a monster 18-inch wild brown. I was so shocked to find such a huge fish in such a small piece of water. Somehow I netted the fish even after breaking my rod, accidental high stick at the very end. Still completely in a state of shock and awe, I headed out on the hike back to the truck to get another rod. Since I was now back at the truck, on a whim, I decided to head towards the main river and try a section I've never fished before. The water was high and fast, but after my banner brookie day the day before, I was confident I could find more fish. After a few casts into some riffles, bang, fish on. It was an absolutely beautiful wild rainbow. I feel so blessed to have caught such beautiful fish and found some of the most incredible small water I've ever fished. Thank you for inspiring me to get out there and try something new. Katie, that is freaking fantastic. That is Live Real Life right there. That is what it's all about. Going out, exploring, finding something new, getting into awesome fish. I love it. That was so stinking cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I appreciate you a ton. And folks, thank you guys for being here, for being part of the show every week. It means more to us than you can know. Make sure you let everybody else know about VFC. Let them know about Untangled. Tell them about the school group if you're not part of that. It's our free online group where you join in, you get access to me and Alex. You can talk to us. There's like 5,500 other members all across the world you can chat with, talk fishing with, swap tactics, and it's also where we do our live monthly get-togethers. We do a live tying night once a month where we literally just tie flies together, hang out, and talk shop. And then we do a monthly training, a monthly deep dive on one topic as well, where, again, it's a live show. You get to ask Alex and I questions as it's going on. It's a ton of fun. You do not want to miss out on that. So definitely jump in school. There's links for that down in the show notes as well. And until next week, everybody, go find some fish, get out on the water, enjoy yourselves, and live real life.